We cover local business news. ACBJ, as our company is called, American City Business Journal, has built its business on providing local business people with news and information. We like to call it market intelligence, so they can grow their companies and their careers. We came into the Baltimore market over 30 years ago. I was not there then, but we shook up the market. We decided, there's all this information out there that business people don't have access to. It's public, but they don't have the time. So we're going to bring you that information. We send reporters into the courthouses to get all the tax liens and all the lawsuits and incorporations. We still do that. We don't do it at the BBJ. We have part of our company does it for all of our papers now, so it's a lot more sophisticated. And we still, that's a huge part of our business, is making sure we have that information that you can get, but who has the time to run around to Baltimore County, the Carroll County courthouses to find it? So we do that for you. So why am I here today? I'm here to talk about the news. It's the business I've lived in and loved for more than 30 years now. I can't imagine being in any other industry. It has some of the smartest, caring, and nicest people I've ever met, but more on that later. But I know my love of this industry, though at times tested, and definitely the last few years it's been tested, isn't shared by all. I've seen the polls that put journalists even below lawyers, so I don't think there's any lawyers out in the audience. Everyone has an opinion on journalism, every day, I get the phone calls, I get the emails. In fact, nowadays, many people consider themselves journalists. The internet and cell phones have given access to everyone to be a reporter, which in some ways great, some ways, not so good. Sometimes, even our own companies don't think we need the professionals anymore. So we've seen a lot of downsizing in the last few years. The BBJ is a little smaller than we were, but we were always small, always kind of a scrappy, small staff. So we're used to being lean, but it's been really sad to see my colleagues at some of the big newspapers really reduce in size. But love it or hate it, the news business plays an important role in all of our lives. And these days, it's exciting, to see how many changes this industry has gone through. It's very different than it was just 10 years ago, just even 5 years ago. So I'm wondering, what's up for the next 5 years? So maybe in 5 years they'll ask me back and I'll tell you. I'd like to take you, today I'm going to take you through the dramatic changes the industry has gone through during my watch. I'm going to tell it through my eyes, what I've been through. And some of the changes aren't pretty, but I can say that many are exciting, and I'm looking forward to what's next. In our newsroom, I have a newsroom full of millennials mostly, and they have entered a newspaper industry that's very different from the one I entered. But I find it just as fun, and I think I even like it more than some of them. Some of them really want to go back to like the old long story form. They talk about it very nostalgically. Whereas I really am embracing how fast the news industry is now. So first I'll talk about the early days. I don't miss the typewriter. It was revolutionary at the time, but it was tough to write a news story on. That's how I started. My first newspaper job was in 7th grade at the Paxton Hollow Junior High Hollow Log. It was, we covered the school of 7th through 9th grade, and I joined that paper soon after I decided I would become a journalist. Before I had planned to become an FBI agent, I was obsessed with police shows. I used to watch Streets of San Francisco. I'm going to date myself, Starsky and Hutch. My dad remembers. But my mother worried about the FBI. She said it was too dangerous. You don't want to do that. Find something else. So I started thinking, yeah, I like to write. I always like to write little books. Love the news. From Philadelphia, I used to watch Action News. So I used to stay up late to watch it. I loved the Philadelphia Inquirer, which I read all the time. So I said, okay, I'll do that. So I joined the staff of the Hollow Log as a photographer. Then I became the editor-in-chief in 9th grade. The news business back then, for me, was typing up a story. I had to use whiteout to cover up any mistakes, and then we mimeographed it and we sent it out to the students, and we hope they read it. Not too different than today. There's no mimeographing involved now. My favorite subjects back then were how bad the school lunch was. That got me in trouble with the cafeteria manager. And then how fast the school bus driver drove. That got him in trouble with the principal. And kids winning their sports or the debate and all the other fun things. I still keep a copy of it in my desk at work to remind me why I'm doing this now. That copy is really yellowed now, and I don't like to take it out because it has the date on that. My staff would just be amazed at how old it is. But one of the stories I had in there was a hard-hitting editorial on how more kids should be allowed to go into Wawa stores. They had a rule that only 2 kids at a time, so I wrote about how awful that was. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I think I might change my editorial opinion now. But that was the late 1970s, and newspapers were a major source of news for the American people. Long investigative stories, detailed coverage of local communities, and pages of retail ads made the newspaper really thick. The 3 networks were dominant at the time. We watched news of the Iran hostage crisis, the gas crisis, the tragedy in Guyana, glued to our television sets. It meant making sure you were home at the right time to watch the news. The news didn't come to you. Then came cable. Of course, it came late to my house. My father couldn't believe what the cable companies charged. So I had to settle for watching MTV at some friends' houses. But eventually it came, and with it came 24-hour news. We all probably still, watched CNN last night. I was glued to the Charlotte coverage, looking at, oh, there's the hotel I'm going to be staying in. And, we didn't have that, luxury. There was no, you could just go online and look at all the coverage last night as well. I was on my phone, on Facebook to see what my Charlotte friends were saying. So it was definitely a different time. And about that same time, we started seeing like People and Us magazines really their news starting to morph into regular news. And it still is, unfortunately. At that time, who was on the dance floor at Studio 54 was a big thing. A real estate mogul named Donald Trump, you may have heard of him, rose to fame as the face of that decade. It was the 1980s, and I truly dove into the news business. There was a lot to cover. If I had been in business news at the time, it would have been fabulous. It was a great time in business. But that wasn't my thing then. I didn't focus on Trump or the New York disco scene. I spent a summer covering courts and police for our local suburban Philadelphia newspaper. I was covering a little town called Upper Darby, if you are familiar with it. I typed up briefs about mailboxes being knocked down, shoplifters arrested at the local mall, car accidents. I was paid $5 per story, so I made sure to find as many as I could. I remember typing them up and trying to make them a little longer. I think I got paid more for longer stories. My big story for the summer was a field of marijuana that was discovered near a residential area. And our suburb really had very little crime, so it was huge news. When I went to college, I joined the staff of the University of Maryland Diamondback, where I graduated from working on a typewriter to a computer. It didn't resemble our colorful computers of today. I remember it was just like black and white screen, but I didn't have to use whiteout. At the University of Maryland, I encountered stories of all kinds, everything from Terps basketball star Adrian Branch getting arrested for pot, to protests over apartheid in South Africa, to the student government becoming a monarchy. We elected King Tom. He had a whole court. It was a lot of fun. We got a lot of national attention. I just saw on Facebook something about it the other day, and it was like reading old pictures, and I was like, oh, there's my story. So it was a really fun time at Maryland. The South Africa protest had me covering students building shanties on the campus mall. I followed them as they marched a meeting across campus with the university president. It was a really interesting time. And then my last year of college was consumed covering the death of basketball star Len Bias from a cocaine overdose. I was working at the Baltimore Evening Sun, now gone, as an intern. A reporter called me because he needed a University of Maryland student to comment for his story. So I got, this call like, hey, you go to Maryland, right? But I need a comment. Tell me about Len Bias. I forget what I said, but I soon saw my words hit the Associated Press wire in the first stories about his death. In those days, the AP was always first. Len Bias lived in my apartment complex, but I never did get to meet him. He was the campus god who was always surrounded by adoring fans. I did get to know his mother, Lonice, as she struggled publicly to honor her son and try to prevent others from meeting the same fate. The school's athletic director and its chancellor lost their jobs. His death completely transformed the University of Maryland, and it's still reverberating, today. You can see it. The tragedy thrust me into the national spotlight. At the time, the major newspapers didn't know much about College Park. That was a great thing for student journalists. They were calling on us to write stories, to help their reporters out, finding things, and it was really good exposure and a great experience, a sad experience, but really good to help you. I left college with incredible experience, covering, being next to Washington. I covered marches on Washington. I covered sports for a while. Is when I decided I was not going to be a sports reporter. I love sports, but there's only so many ways to say someone won a game. The writing to me was just, it was tough, like how many times can I say unanswered points? So I moved on. My heart was always in community journalism, still is. I moved out to Hagerstown to cover city politics. It wasn't quite this crazy presidential election, but small town politics can be pretty crazy. Having always lived in the metro area, covering a rural area that included Western Maryland and parts of West Virginia and Pennsylvania made me realize how different other parts of the country are. It was a really valuable lesson to learn early on in my career that, in the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, we're very different than a lot of parts of the country, and to assume everyone is the same. In Hagerstown, I covered my first fires, my first murder. I still remember hearing the police scanner blurt out that there was a murder at the Pizza Hut. I quickly drove to the scene. I approached the police officer, and this is how clueless I was. And he told me, oh, the victims are being worked on. And I said, oh, they've taken them to the hospital. And he said, no, they're dead. I'm like, oh, okay. It was a shock. Until then, the only crime scene I had witnessed was on TV. It turned out it was a murder-suicide. The husband had shot his wife in front of their 4-year-old son during dinner. And the police said the son was trying desperately to wake up the father. And I remember I used that as my lead, and I also talked to people who have been in there. It was just a really heartbreaking scene. I saw the bodies of both the man and the woman through the window of Pizza Hut. The father was still on the floor. I remember seeing that, still remember seeing that little boy in the police car. And then I also remember seeing people who were still trying to eat their dinners, despite there being 2 dead bodies nearby. They didn't want to interrupt their dinners. Yeah, it's awful. They had a hard time getting them out of the restaurant. Needless to say, I have never eaten at a Pizza Hut again, but no offense, we're not a sponsor. I spent 2 valuable years in Hagerstown learning the business. I also met my husband, Michael, Baltimore native there. He worked for a local TV station as a reporter. He's no longer in the business. We competed on stories, and I'm still mad at him for beating me on a story about Frostburg University opening a campus in downtown Hagerstown. So, but he doesn't even remember that story. From Hagerstown, I moved on to covering education at the Annapolis Capital before moving to Baltimore to cover banking for the Baltimore Business Journal. It was great timing. We were buying a house in Federal Hill at the same time I got the job. I think we moved that weekend. I started a new job that Monday. Haven't left. We moved to the other side of town to have a bigger house, but been loving the city still. I was a reporter for the BBJ for 3 years before joining the staff of American Bankers, newspaper's Washington Bureau. I fell in love with banking reporting. This is something, I never even balanced my checkbook before, but I just really liked banking. Following the money leads to great stories, and I always tell this to the reporters now too. you'll be surprised, business news is not boring. It's all about people, just listening to this room full of entrepreneurs. It's always fascinating. There's so many good stories to tell. I rejoined the Baltimore Business Journal as editor. I realized I missed working in Baltimore and didn't love that MARC train commute either. And I missed local news. An American banker, I traveled around the country writing about community banks. It was a great way to see some interesting small towns and meet bankers of all types. I interviewed a banker in Harlem who took me to the famous Sylvia's Soul Food restaurant. It was one of his customers. I got to have lemonade with Sylvia. I interviewed a small town southern banker as a tornado was approaching. That was a little scary. I didn't expect banking, news to be so exciting, but it still is. The Baltimore Business Journal I joined 23 years ago was a different place than where I work today. The most obvious thing is we didn't use the email and internet back then. We had to find information the old-fashioned way, in person, on the phone, at the library, the courthouse, office building, or even in the phone book. As an aside, the other day, one of my reporters, we were doing a story, and I said, did you try getting this guy? His company had failed, and I said, you need to get his phone number at the company was no longer in service. I said, well, try to get him at home. She said, how do I do that? I'm like, a phone book? And we don't have any phone books in the office anymore, but everything's online. I said, go to switchboard.com. And I showed her how to do that, and she was amazed. So, anyway, that was, she was very excited by that new tool. The BBJ used to be a weekly paper only that came out on Friday. We would hope and pray our stories would not be in the sun before that Friday. Thursday nights used to, I used to sit up Thursday night saying, oh, I hope they don't have that story, we have a great scoop, and then we'd be so happy the next day. We don't wait for Friday anymore. We break news every day. We broke the story yesterday about Cal Ripken's house being on the market. I think we had about, by the end of the day, like 150,000 page views. A lot of those in the first couple minutes. But we got the tip and wrote it up, and it was out there. In the old days, we might have been waiting until Friday, hoping that the Sun didn't have it too. But so we worked hard, and we still do, to get those scoops. Only now we get them every day. There's no waiting for news. The news cycle is extremely fast. People consume it just as quickly. I know you probably all get alerts on your phones and everything. People want it right away. And, like we were talking about Brad Pitt earlier, got a text alert about their marriage dissolving the other day. I'm like, I'm not sure I really needed to know that right away, but it was interesting. The BBJ now produces 3 newsletters each day. Our morning edition, our real estate newsletter at noon, and our afternoon edition at 3. We send out breaking news alerts whenever we have something we think people need to know this right now. Let's get it out there. We still produce a stellar weekly paper that goes into news in more depth. It gives you access to new companies, important people, and lots of information. We produce lists on dozens of industries, and we offer readers data from the public record that allows them to see what their potential clients are up to. We get so many people who say, oh, I always read the tax liens first, or the lawsuits. We get a lot of our stories actually from our own public record. We have an intensely loyal readership that needs their local business news. Giving people information that they can't find anywhere else has kept the BBJ in business, and our parent company as well. We're still alive and thriving. I'm happy to report we have had circulation growth every year I've been with the BBJ. It may not be really large, but we continue to add to print subscribers, which is really unusual in the industry. Some people really just want to hold on to their print. I have a bunch of copies actually outside if you want to grab one on your way out, but some people still love to read it that way. You can also get the digital edition, which is exactly like the print edition. You can flip the papers by just pressing the button, and you can see everything, the ads and everything. And then having a niche is important in today's news. That's why we remain steadfastly local. If you look through our paper, we focus on local faces, local stories. We don't have to be the Wall Street Journal. We don't, want to be. We'll never try to be the Post or even the Baltimore Sun. Daily circulation newspapers are especially struggling right now because they don't have a niche. You can find their stories in many places. You know, I can read a story about a national news press conference on many different mediums. You know, we have CNBC on all day, and we're constantly seeing, you know, whatever's going on nationally, and, you know, with the Fed news yesterday, and, you know, we can get that anywhere, but people can't get the story about the small startup in Baltimore everywhere. But 5 years ago, regardless of how well we were doing, we realized we had to alter the way we do business. We couldn't keep going the way we were, though we have many loyal readers, many are older. Many of today's younger readers consume their news on digital platforms, computers, iPads, and phones. They don't want a print newspaper. So we decided we had to start breaking news straight to the digital platforms. And what hasn't changed is that our print publication, Daily Edition, still strive to give you that information that you can't get anywhere else. We charge for our print edition copy, and increasingly, a lot of our daily breaking news stories are being put behind the paywall. The company is experimenting in a lot of different things, how to charge, how to make money. We used to charge, and we still do, charge a lot for the print edition advertising, but digital, when it came out, newspapers, you know, really discounted it. It wasn't considered as valuable, and it's a decision that a lot of people are regretting. So they're still trying to figure out how to make money. That's why so many are folding. You know, I see it all the time. You know, I have friends in, you know, different industries who have lost their jobs. I see publications, even my local little newspaper, the Baltimore Guide, went under this year. I was so sad. That was kind of my backup plan. But it's you know, it's really sorrowing to see. The TV stations, they're hurting as well. A lot of people don't sit down at 6 o'clock to watch the news anymore. They can get that same news anytime. Besides, they don't have to sit through all the drug commercials that worry about all the bad side effects. I happily pay to get the Sun, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal online and in print on my phone, you know, as well. I have several other news apps that I check every day. I check Philly.com, my app, every day. I'm definitely willing to pay for news because I know, you know, I need to stay employed in this industry. I'm not sure what the paper will look like in the coming years. Will we still be reading print? A few years ago, I would have said absolutely. I was always a die-hard print reader, but I find my daily news reading habits migrating towards online. The first thing I do when I get up in the morning is I look at my Sun comes to my email, my digital edition, and I look to see what stories we might have to follow up, what we would beat on. I used to have to wait for the guy to deliver the paper through the mail slot to do that. Now I can have angst earlier in the day. You know, I'm still a die-hard print reader when it comes to magazines and the Sunday New York Times. I love nothing more than to sit on the couch and go through that thick, great paper. Usually it takes me a couple days to go through it. But there aren't many people younger than me who feel the same way. I have a newsroom, like I said, full of millennials. And I see the print papers that, you know, I try to get all the subscriptions and Business Week. I'm like, hey, read that. Make sure you read that. And they're like, oh, I read it. I read it on my phone. I'm like, did you read the whole thing? I'm not sure. So it's a challenge. But, you know, hopefully, you know, we'll make that migration to digital and make it smoothly. The news on social media, a lot of people just get their news on social media. I think that's good to get some things, but it's really selective, and it depends who you follow, so that's hit or miss. You miss a lot of things if you're not looking at the full newspaper or entire newscast. It worries me because you can also find stories in the ads. I always tell the reporters, you know, I saw that in the legal ad in the Sun. Anyway, if you read only the app, you're not going to see that. So it's a work in progress with my staff, you know, trying to make sure they realize the old ways were good as well. But nowadays, there's a lot of exciting developments. Like as a reporter, all I ever had to do was have a pen and a pad. Now, we take video, photos, we create graphics to help reach our many readers. Some people love video, and so we're doing a lot more of that in the newsroom. Being a reporter can be very schizophrenic. I feel bad for them. Some days we'll say, oh, make sure you tweet from that meeting, and make sure you take some pictures, and make sure you post on Facebook, and oh yeah, and don't forget to take a little video. So they are running around. Their iPhones are a major tool. They still use their reporter pen and notebook stuff. You may have noticed a few changes in your daily newspaper over the years. First of all, they used to have a lot more pages. The paper stock is thinner. The stories are most likely shorter. There are fewer foreign and national news stories, and definitely less space devoted to science, the arts, features. Your food section is definitely a lot smaller. And the crossword puzzle is not as big, less space for TV listings and stock tables. A lot of papers have gotten rid of their stock tables. You can go online and find out, or your phone has the stock app. The Pew Research Center does an annual report on the state of the news media. I looked at it this year, and it is not pretty. In 2015, the newspaper sector had the worst year since the recession and its immediate aftermath. Average weekday newspaper circulation fell another 7% in 2015. That was the greatest decline since 2010. While digital circulation crept up slightly, about 2% per weekday, and accounts for only 22% of total circulation. According to Pew, total advertising revenue among publicly traded companies declined nearly 8%, and including losses not just in print, but digital as well. So, like I said, we're still trying to figure out making money on the digital side as well. The Pew study found that the latest newspaper newsroom employment figures showed 10% declines, greater than any year since 2009, leaving a workforce that is 20,000 positions smaller than 20 years ago. And the cuts keep coming. In 2016, at least 400 cuts, buyouts, or layoffs have been announced. Ownership trends show further signs of devaluation as 3 newspaper companies, EW Scripps, Journal Communications, and Gannett continue to, or consolidating. And the recently renamed Tribune Publishing Company, the parent company of the Sun, is trying to fend off an attempt by Gannett to buy it. It's now called Trunk. We're still trying to figure that one out, but it's a new digital era word. A January 2016 Pew Research Center survey found that just 5% of U.S. adults who had learned about the presidential election in that week in January named print newspapers as their most helpful source, trailing nearly every other category by wide margins. Sounds pretty bleak, but there's definitely a bright spot in the Pew Research survey. It focused on original reporting and writing. Without the two, there will be no content for people to take and post on Facebook and other websites. It's why we're still in business. You need people to do this work, and it's not easy work. It's not as easy as just, you don't just find stories. The news has to come from somewhere. I can tell you it's often hard and laborious process. It's why I have so much respect for journalists around the world. It's not easy getting people to tell you what nobody wants you to know. Even at the lowest, level, you find that it's very hard to get people to talk. Dealing with Baltimore City Hall is impossible. We're hoping for, a little bit better communication in the next administration. We'll see. It's always a challenge. But journalists' work is crucial to our daily lives and in the U.S. to our democracy. Where do we find news? This content that keeps the industry humming. At the BBJ, I see our reporters and editors each day try to find business news that's important to readers. We listen to countless pitches from companies. Somebody was asking me today, do you get pitched a lot? We get pitched a lot. We're always hearing about how we should be covering this or covering that, and a lot of our tipsters and people who tell us this give us great stories. We sift through these to make sure we're giving you news, not promotion. We don't want to give you ads. We want to give you, real news stories that you can use to help you in your business. The reporters talk to many people, our sources, as we like to call them. They go to the courthouses, they go to public meetings, they go to shareholder meetings, they go to networking events, they go to demonstrations, they cruise social media, the internet, other media sources. Our very small staff really gets around, because that's how you find news. You have to work for it. But not everyone wants to pay for news these days. We still offer a lot of free stories out there. Whether or not that's going to continue, we're keeping an eye on that. We'll see how the trends go. But I laugh at how often I get calls from people, and now tweets, we'll get tweets like, why is that story behind the paywall? You know, can you please send me 3 copies of that story, or can you send me the paper? I feel like the library sometimes. I get calls and I'm like, can you send me that article that ran in 2005? I'm like, no, I don't save them that far back. It's online, but it's our product. I'm not sure how many businesses give away their merchandise. I certainly don't walk into Starbucks and say, you know, can I have my ice cream latte for free? But for some reason, people feel like news should always be free. Is it a losing battle? I hope not. As an industry, we have to work harder to get that content and follow the same principles we've always strived for. The news must be timely, accurate, and fair. It's something, you know, we ask of every story. Is this fair? Did you make sure you get that guy in that story that you're quoting? You know, make sure his name is right. If you don't get the name right, your story, it could be the best story in the world, but it's not worth anything. You know, and we've made those mistakes, and we will in the future, but it's something that we have to always work to be better at. We have to prove to our readers that they need us to do business and in general sense to live their lives. That said, I'm all for delivering the news on different platforms. Print still has its place. Tablets, phones, and laptops are still great places where you can consume news. I'm definitely not against them. You can get the BBJ News Alert sent to your phone. You can see our entire print, paper, and digital form, turn the pages. Increasingly, lots of readers love that. And then there's social media. Some people don't love email. We send a lot of emails, and you know, some people love them, but some people like my inbox is so full. I can relate. I have literally, when I get back to the office, or on my way back to the office, I will see probably hundreds and hundreds of emails that I get, and I try to answer most. And if anyone in this room that hasn't heard back from me, it's probably because it got lost somewhere or got deleted, because it's amazing, and I get lots of media emails as well, so my inbox is really flooded. So a lot of people just prefer Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Those are the 3 social media sites that the BBJ is most active on. We have some people who really like to put our stories on Reddit, which it's usually there's one guy in Baltimore who's a big Reddit guy, and puts stories of interest. Usually it's more like restaurant type news. But so social media, most of us in the room aren't millennials, but it's not just millennials driving the social media craze. I'm sure there are more than a few of us who are active social media users. I'm looking at one, Tony's mom. She's on Facebook all the time. I have to say I'm addicted to Twitter. I have a lot of news outlets that I follow, a lot of different businesses and politicians and everything. It can be fascinating. You find a lot of stories on there, but you can also get lost in there every day. A majority of U.S. adults, 62%, get news on social media, and 18% do so often, according to a new survey by the Pew Research Center. 2/3 of Facebook users get news on the site. Nearly 6 in 10 Twitter users get news on Twitter, and 7 in 10 Reddit users get news on that platform. Twitter is often the place to find out what's happening right away. We use Twitter to report live from events. We've been covering the Port Covington hearings at City Hall the last couple of months, and our reporter Melody would go and she'd be tweeting pictures of different things, of protests and this, very fast. And then after that, she would write the story for the website, which we would then send it by email. But Twitter is a really great place to just break news. And if you're not on there yet, you know, take a look. I now have like 4,000 followers. I don't post every day. I'm trying to post more because I'm like, well, I have to give them something, I guess. But, you know, on some days it's really obvious. You know, something breaks and it's like, oh, I got to get that up there, or I've got to I'm at a meeting like this, if I wasn't talking, I might say, oh, the speaker just said this at the meeting I'm in. Reporters can now send out breaking news to their audience while it's happening. We send pictures and quotes from events. Twitter can be a little scary. It's basically journalism without the editing. Like sometimes I'll be in an event and I'll say, did he just really say that? I've got to get that out on Twitter. But I'm like typing. I'm like, oh, I hope I don't have any typos. And I'll turn to the person sitting next to me like, can you edit this? Because none of our copy goes out unedited, including mine, because for a reason, we're not infallible. So you have to make sure what you're posting is correct. Much of our online traffic comes from Facebook and Twitter, and that's only expected to grow. That's why, we try to get our news out on those platforms. We try to put our events. The Cal Ripken story yesterday we put on Facebook, it had over 250 shares or something that I looked earlier today. So people were just sharing it around saying, oh, look at that, he has 10 bathrooms. And it had, I thought it reached thousands and thousands of people. So the use of technology will continue to drive our industry even more as the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world start to look for ways to get into the news business. They are our biggest competitors right now is, Facebook, Twitter. You'll see, Jeff Bezos being in charge of the Washington Post is really changing the way that company is delivering news. So there's lots of changes ahead. Technology will help and hurt the industry probably. But I look forward to the future of journalism. It's only getting more exciting the longer I stay. I don't think the journalism jobs will go away, but they certainly will be different years from now. I only need to watch my 12-year-old's interest in news to know that journalism will be alive and well when he's an adult. Though he probably won't first go to his mailbox to find out what's happening. I watch him today as he reaches for my phone and tells me he just wants to know what the news is, Mom. He loves the WBAL app, and he looks for it. He's a big, he actually wants to be an FBI agent. I'm a little worried that he also wants to be a reporter, but he loves the news alerts that pop up on my screen throughout the day. He'll say, oh, look what happened. But enough about technology in the future. What about the present? Why do I love this business now, despite its uncertainty? It all goes back to the news. It's an exciting time to be covering business in Baltimore. Look around you and you'll see cranes popping up everywhere. Right next door, that way, probably messed up parking for everyone today. The City Council just approved $660 million in tax increment financing for Kevin Klein's Port Covington development. No matter what you think about that, it's going to be huge for Baltimore. $5.5 billion development expected to create thousands of jobs and transform the aging industrial waterfront in South Baltimore. It will, I hope I'll still be covering that when it's finally built. It's been fascinating to cover Kevin Klein's rise over the years. I still remember when he came to the BBJ office with some shirts, and we were like, oh, it's the guy selling t-shirts. He's now the force changing so much of the city's landscape. If you haven't been to Fells Point, his hotel is going up. It's looking amazing. Having looked at that wreck here for so long, falling into the harbor, it's very refreshing. His plans have given the city much needed good news after last year's riots. It was a tough time for our city and one that hopefully we're learning from. It's encouraging to hear the dialogue about fixing the many ills that have plagued the city for decades. But Kevin Klein is only one of the many entrepreneurs that make the region's renaissance so amazing to watch. Some are in this room. Allie, who we just had a story on her from Group 1 Apparel. And she's one of our 40 under 40s as well. She has a really interesting new company, and she's wearing a Maryland flag dress, which is really cool. So it's really exciting to watch these many business people are creating new jobs and new concepts. Trade Point Atlantic is building an economic hub at the former Sparrows Point steel mill. Columbia is being transformed into a bustling city. And Owings Mills is welcoming lots of new retail, including a brand new Wegmans that just opened last week, that people apparently are lining up to go in. I have not been. There are so many exciting startups to watch. Technology, new manufacturing, healthcare, and education will likely be huge economic drivers for our region. Having Johns Hopkins and University of Maryland anchoring, parts of downtown, it's just amazing to watch how they're really developing around their neighborhoods around them. They're getting more involved. Hopkins is really trying to make an effort to go beyond its own borders and to really try to help the city. And I think we're going to see even better things in the future. These are just a few of the stories that BBJ is busy pursuing as we continue to figure out journalism in 2016. No matter what happens to our business, I don't ever worry about running out of news. So I want to thank you for having me today. I really appreciate being here at the CEO Club, and I'm just going to open it up to questions if we have time. If anyone has any questions.
First of all, what happened to the 4-year-old boy? Did you follow up and see how he does?
You know what? The other day when I was writing this, I thought about that. I said, it's been over 25 years. I wonder what happened. I might actually call one of the editors there and talk to them about that, because I still have some people in the same paper.
I have a question on making Baltimore Business Journal more collaborative or interactive. Like, for example, Yahoo News, the stories, everybody can post comments, their profile, you can see who's doing what. I noticed that Baltimore Business Journal has not grasped that yet.
We are definitely behind on that.
Can you repeat the question for the?
Oh, yes. The question is how to make the Baltimore Business Journal more collaborative. Like, you can do a lot more on other sites, like chats and comments on stories. Our corporate office, in Charlotte, controls our website, and they have a team. We have a new chief technology officer that is working on a lot of things. They're going to make a lot of changes, including making our content management system easier to put more creative things in our stories as well. So we hope to have more of that in the next, we'll see some changes in the next year.
I know a good company in Baltimore. I know a good company in Baltimore that do all that.
Well, definitely you can talk to somebody down there this weekend, maybe, or maybe not. So that'd be great.
What about the lot of misinformation from these other reporters that are doing things on their own, that are putting things out? How do we combat all that?
I think by us getting it right, we won't run a story unless we know it's right. We still have the same, even if we're going to get beat, if we don't have solid sources, we're not going to go with it. So we're not going with rumor, we're not going with innuendo, or just because everyone else is reporting that. We still have the same standards. If we're going to run a story and we don't do it often without naming the people who are giving the information, the reporter can't just go with it. I have to know who it is. It has to be a primary source. We try to have at least 2 people, saying the same thing. So the standards are still really high, and that's how you have to combat that. Because there are a lot of fake news outlets on the internet now. People are like, "Oh, so and so died." It's like, no, he didn't. That's a fake news outlet. So people are getting fooled very easily.
I think the BBJ does a nice job with business news, and I've always relied on the BBJ. But how do you feel about the environment in the news industry as a whole of being less reputational integrity, let's say, of being less of a news reporting industry and more of a biased news reporting industry?
Yeah, that's a tough one. There's so much going on, like, it's a hard one to answer because I guess it depends, your viewpoint. I don't see news I see some of the TV stations are scarily biased on both sides, mostly by the people who are running some of the shows that they do. I think the vast majority of journalists, of course there's always going to be some kind of bias, but try to get it right, try to get it fair. And we're kind of lumped in with all the people on some of these ridiculous talking head shows and everything. I always think it's a good job when we get yelled at by both sides. know, people think, oh, you like them better, or you like them better. We heard a lot of that with Port Covington. We would have, you know, the activists tell us, oh, you really like Sagamore development, and we'd have the Sagamore people telling us, you were really siding with the activists. You know, we're just trying to report, and it, you know, it's hard. So you can't really change people's perceptions sometimes. You know, we have to battle that every day, and we just have to battle it with trying to get it right and being fair.
First of all, my compliments to you for being an editor for 15 years in this kind of environment, with everything changing as well. And I'm just wondering, you had this training in journalism with the Merrill School. Was there any training in being an editor and an administrator in this business?
No, I have to say a lot of that came from the company that I'm with, why I'm with them for so long. They've been great about management training. We had Gallup training. We've had, you know, it's a big part of our culture to try to help you be more of a manager, leader. So there's very little management training in journalism school. Editing, you know, they teach you how to use the AP style book and, you know, how to do that, but no one really teaches you how to manage people. And it's something you have to learn every day, you know, like any other manager in the room. It's hard. Hiring is really hard today.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
After you leave journalism, whenever that day comes, what do you see yourself doing? What's your life purpose?
You know, I have to say I've always had like teaching in the back of my mind, like, so I'm fascinated with groups like Teach for America, your organization. So that definitely appeals to me. Maybe someday. Chemist, no, not chemist. Remember, I didn't do well in chemistry class.
With your background covering banking, by the way, what's with this Wells Fargo?
Oh, that's a good story. I mean, it's not a surprise, you know. I think, you know, it'll be amazing to see how it plays out. But, you know, they've had a lot of, you know, through the financial crisis and everything, they've been accused of a lot of things, so it'll be interesting.
Is it wider than just Wells Fargo? Or other banks doing it?
You know, I don't know. You know, I know that the community banks are really worried that they're going to get lumped in and they're going to get penalized for this. They often have to bear the burden of the big banks' problems with more regulation. So we were talking to community banks this week who said, this worries us because it could mean all of a sudden we're going to have to report a lot more. And that's led to a lot of community banks selling because the regulations are so, you know, they're getting overburdened by them. They can't keep up. So it could be another shakeout, another M&A shakeout in the next few years.
Your Italian heritage, benissimo. Thank you.
Thank you.